I'm starting this video a little differently by hanging out in my mechanical room. Before I bought this house, I knew I'd want to move my furnace. It was stuck in the middle of the dumb end of the basement, and my thought was, okay, so a little bit of sheet metal work, and I can open things up a lot. Realtor thought so too. So I called around, had some guys come through to quote, and their attitude was generally along the lines of, I'm a furnace technician, so I should always get $200 to $250 an hour no matter what. Or, I don't really want this job, so I'm going to give you a stupid high dumb quote. Prices I was given ranged from $4,000 to $9,000. So of course I just ended up doing it myself and spending about $1,000 in materials and tools, and it took me, a noob with no experience, working alone, less than a week. A guy who knows what he's doing, with even a first day totally inexperienced helper just there to hold things up, could have banged it out in like 2 days, no sweat. By far, the trade that is the most gatekept here is HVAC. And I had a heck of a time trying to find any information or resources. Even when talking with professionals, they had rules of thumb or guidelines that just ended up making no sense at all. If you're going to do your own HVAC, I suggest seeing if you can find a pro to have in your pocket that you can pay to answer some questions, do some design help, all of that sort of thing. I tried. But the closest I got was a guy who couldn't believe how clean my work was and wanted to hire me to work for him. In the end, the difficult part of HVAC is the design. All the actual physical work is stupid easy. The hardest part that I had to fabricate and install was a transition piece that reduced both in height and in width. So what did I do? Grabbed some cardboard and made a template. Then with the template, I transferred it to my sheet metal and it came out perfectly. First try. It's literally paper craft with metal. And almost everything comes in standardized sizes. I was able to find some resources on YouTube, but there was a lot that was left out to just figure out. So the following video is a collection of some of the more useful things, if less talked about, and solutions to the problems that I ran into.
Tip number 1, don't put your supports for your ductwork exactly at where you're going to have the seams for your ductwork. Makes it impossible to screw in and impossible to tape. Not quite impossible, but really difficult. So we're going to bang this off and slide it down this way a little bit and put a new one on. There. Now it's out of the way of this line. When I bring that bit of pipe over, we'll be good. If you're using elbows for things and trying to measure distances, note that they might not be symmetrical. This is 7 3/4. Turn it around. That's 7. When I'm marking my pipe to get cut, the only way I've been able to come up with to do it is to mark little bits all the way around and then connect the dots manually and then cut along that line. If anyone has a better idea about how to do this, I would love to hear it, because this is kind of barbaric. When it comes to cutting this stuff, especially when it's already assembled, but even when it's not, these guys, they'll work, but there'll be a lot of effort. If you are doing a project of this scope, where you're doing your own heat runs for your basement, and you're trying to save money by not hiring someone else to do it, save yourself the effort and get yourself a pair of the big shears. Doesn't have to be this brand, doesn't have to be this size, but a big pair of shears makes it much easier to get through. And then when you start cutting these, when I'm cutting these, I like to go about halfway around and then flip it over and come back at it from the other side. This lets me put a little bit less deformation in the sheet metal, and I'll even come along with a pair of these offset snips to finish off the last little bit so that it can cut round instead of squishing it out. And because I am bad at this, I often can't make my lines meet up. When I'm assembling these, I'm not just pushing them together round, I'm pushing them flat and then together. And of course, because that's a cut edge, it's gonna make it difficult for me. Not hard on the 5s, really easy on the 6s. If you're dealing with any of the 4s, it definitely gets more difficult. You'll notice that when I start these, I often go beyond what might be flat to where it's actually caved in a little bit there. And then the rest of the way down, get it flat before it pushes in. And because I already chopped off the crimp on this one, I will go around with my crimping tool and get it shrunk in a little bit. You'll notice though that I never ever crimp both ends of a pipe, because you want to always have your overlaps going in the direction of the airflow. So the outside will always be on the starter end of the airflow and the inside will always be on the end. So that'll slip in there, and you can see that by the crimped end being at the end of the airflow, I'm not going to be catching an edge as the air passes through. It's important to note, and you will see a lot of YouTubers just sort of leaving that part out. So I did say before that the 5-inch and the 6-inch were really easy to assemble, and the 4 inches are where you're gonna run into some struggle. So I thought I would show you how much effort I have to put in to get this 4-inch to behave. Like I said, 4 inches are the most difficult. I'm having a little bit of trouble getting this one to fit on nicely because I don't always remember to pre-crimp the factory ends. But a lot of the time, you don't have to come around and re-crimp the whole end. A lot of the time, it's just the button lock that's sticking out a bit too much. So we're gonna see if that little bit of squeezing that down is enough to get this to fit on without re-crimping everything. We're going to squeeze this end in too, because that might be contributing to the problem. And there we go. So instead of coming along and re-crimping this entire end with the crimping tool, just squishing up the seams a little bit can help. If you ever have the opportunity, leave your ductwork a little bit loose before you come to tape it, so that you can start on one side with all the access you might want. Slide it over and wrap it around the other side without any problems. If you're taking this job on by yourself, you might be a little bit confused about which screws to use. And trust me when I say the ones from the hardware store that have the little spade on the end that are advertised as self-tapping are absolute trash, and you'll hate using them. Find yourself something like this. This is a Canadian product, Super Saber Point. They're also called zip screws. They have a hex head on the end that go into your magnetic hex head driver bit. And even without the spade at the end, they actually do a very nice job of zipping in there. So do not get the Home Depot or the Lowe's ones that advertise themselves as self-tapping. Go to a specialty fastener shop and get these guys. I would put a link to these for my Amazon affiliate, but I don't have that, so just see what you can find. If you go to a specialty fastener shop or an HVAC shop, these screws are actually a lot cheaper, even in the quantity of 1,000. Like, I've barely touched these, than what you would pay for the ones that you don't want to use from the hardware store. Something I've been trying to pay some particular attention to with all of this stuff is, are my runs actually straight? And a lot of the time, when I'm just like up here shoving stuff around, it ends up kind of a little off to the side like that. And you can see it's got that angle there. Now, I'm sure that makes an immeasurable amount of difference to the actual airflow, but I'm also sure that this looks better. It took me all of about 30 seconds to make sure that that was in line where I wanted it. And even if I've got 20 heat runs, a total of 10 minutes over all the time that I'm spending on this stuff, that's a pretty small time investment for, boy, isn't that nice and straight and professional looking. It was just pointed out to me that this is not center. When I'm talking about straight, I'm talking about the actual run itself. I'm not talking about is it perfectly parallel to the floor joists. Because for one, I can scoot that around a bit. And for two, when I'm working on this, whether it starts here or ends up in the middle, none of those are necessarily the perfect final finish position. What I'm concerned about right now is just, is the run itself straight? I can fix the final position when the time comes. Sometimes you have to get your boot put in before you can finish your run because of funny things like basement framing or just whatever. When that happens, you can't get a perfectly fitting piece of pipe to go from this edge to this edge. So what I do is I make sure that the tape is right up against the deepest spot there, and I will measure to this pipe. And I got 28 3/4, just a little bit shy. I'll go and cut that, and what I'll do is get it all the way in there, then I'll lift it up, slide it back a bit, and I will take up some of that very tight joint I have over there that you probably can't see because of this light, and I will slide this one over this way, and I'll have to sort of try to even out the overlaps so that they're relatively equal and I don't just have like hanging on by a hair at this one. When I've got a new freshly cut edge, I'm never very confident that where I started the circle here is where I ended the circle here. So I always flip it around to a factory edge and join it from there, because this lined up is always going to be perfect. And it looks like I did a pretty good job here too. I've got this cut, and you can see balancing it on the edge there. I'm just a little bit shy of this edge here, so I'm hoping I can slip this in all the way to this guy and just barely squeak it on the end of this one here. And then we pull it back a little bit. So I've got a little bit here and just a very little bit here. Now I come back to this connection and slide this out a little bit. So I've got about a 1/2 inch there, maybe a little more. And I come back to these two and try to make it a little bit more even here. So it looks like we're about 3/4 there, about 3/4 there, and about 3/4 there. So that's how, when I've got a boot that I've got to put in first, I get these things to still connect. The last gas fitter to come through told me that actually taping these joints is required by code. So I'm coming through and I'm retaping all these joints. Now we'll check that later, but in the meantime, I've got some stream content, I've got some YouTube content, and I've got a way to develop kind of a probably slightly unorthodox technique, which is something I'm all about. And that slightly unorthodox technique is using a drywall tape hanger to hang my silver tape so I don't have to fuss with it. And that one was 100% my own idea and is working really quite well. And the other thing, now this was a suggestion that I was given by someone in my Twitch chat, thank you very much, is take a shim and wrap it in some painter's tape so it's nice and soft and round, and that'll let it get into these really small tight spaces up here.